1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program, moms. One of my favorite guests is David Schoen. He's a Orthodox attorney. He specializes in federal criminal defense, civil rights law. He represented former President Donald Trump during his second impeachment trial. He's currently representing Steve Bannon. His father was an FBI agent. He's based in Alabama. He also practices in New York. And I believe you also represented Jeffrey Epstein for a while before he passed away. So, Shavua Tov, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the broadcast with us.
Shavua Tov. It's an honor always. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I didn't realize till tonight, what was it like being with Jeffrey Epstein? Because I know he's vilified. And do you believe, for example, that he actually died in natural causes in jail, or was there something more to the whole story?
Yeah, I don't believe it was suicide. He was an interesting guy. For the year before he passed away, he had been calling me to review his lawyer's work, asking me to take over his case and so on. He had a civil case pending and trying to reopen a criminal case in Florida. And then when he got arrested, his people called me and asked me if I would fly up to see him. I said I couldn't. And he had, several top name lawyers at that time, but they kept pressing. So I went to see him about 9 days before he passed away, and he hired me to represent him to take over the case. I said it'd be subject to talking to his current lawyers, or I would put together my own team. But after that, I was regularly in touch with the team he had and his in-house folks and all that. And he was very excited about going forward and fighting the case, even the day before he died. And so anecdotally, everything that I saw was not a guy who would commit suicide. But then, we brought in the top forensic expert in the world, Michael Baden, and he said he's never seen a suicide consistent with the injuries he saw there. So I had, listen, as a criminal defense lawyer, you often represent unpopular people. I was very encouraged about fighting his case. A lot of evidence that never came out in the public, and he was looking forward to fighting it. So I don't think he committed suicide, but I mean, we may never know.
Wow. I guess nobody's really checking into it to see what happened to him. That's a mute point at time, right? I would say so.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, maybe we'll talk about it a little later on, but one of the more unpopular people that you've represented, of course, is Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you got a lot of flack for that, too. Did it affect your practice at all?
I wouldn't say it really affected my practice, more my personal life in a sense. Listen, I got boxes full of handwritten letters from people commending me and thanking me and so on. But there were the threats and unfortunately from a lot of Jewish folks who said, how dare I think that I'm speaking for the Jewish people. And I said, I never suggested any such thing. But some were very threatening. One got very graphic in terms of what he was planning to do and references to the Holocaust and that sort of thing. So that was, some unpleasant stuff. But all in all, it was a great honor. And, I certainly would do it again. And I would do some things differently, I think, if I did it again. But anyway, it was quite an experience, I'd say.
When you say you do things differently, what do you mean by that?
Well, all of this came up at the last minute. I mean, I was contacted about 2 weeks before the impeachment trial by Mark Meadows, first on a Sunday night, calling me and asking me if I would consider it. And that sort of took me aback, coming just out of the blue. So I said I would consider it, depend on who would be on the team. And he said, we talked for a while, and then he said he would have President Trump call me the next day. But about an hour later that evening, President Trump called me. We had a terrific talk. And, he asked me if I would consider taking it on. So I said I would think about it during the week. We talked a couple more times, very nice talks. And then I read in the press that a team from South Carolina had been hired. So I went back to Mark Meadows and I say, it looks like, you've hired your team. Thank you for considering me. He said, no, that was just leaked to the press. That's not really the team yet. So then President Trump called and asked if I would head up that team in South Carolina. I said I didn't think they would accept that. They were experienced lawyers who had never heard of me and wouldn't accept and so on. He said he was sure they would. And in fact, they did. And they were very nice folks. But they weren't in sync with these folks working on the president's team in-house. So they had a conference on a Shabbos and they were let go. Very false press report. The press reports were that they quit because President Trump was pressing them to raise election fraud. That wasn't true at all. But anyway, so they told me that. And then President Trump asked me if I would just take over the case and do it by myself. I said I thought it was far too much for me to handle. There were briefs to do and a lot of work. I'd never done anything like this before. So they were supposed to put together, a team of some sort of top-notch lawyers to do some writing for me, but that didn't work out. And I think he had some bad in-house advisors, President Trump at the time, who were not really working in his best interests. I made some connections of my own with some terrific lawyers who were willing to get involved, but his team nixed him because they said they hadn't vetted them. And none of this was run by President Trump. It was all by the people, his staff, that sort of thing, particularly one or two guys. So they ended up putting together a team that I didn't think was ideal in the end, actually. And I'm sorry that I didn't insist on putting together my own team. But anyway, look, it worked out. So.
No, it certainly did. Even though it seems like you might be called upon again. It looks like they want to bring him up on charges from the Department of Justice. If I'm watching the January 6th proceedings, it seems like the conclusion that they want to draw is that he incited the riot. He was responsible for what happened on January 6th. So therefore, there is a possibility they can bring him up on charges. Are you concerned about that?
I'm concerned about it because you're 100% right. That is the agenda of the committee. They see this committee, I believe, as their number one campaign tool. Rather than answering policy problems that are going on these days, they want to get the American public to focus on this and believe that, this is the only thing that should be their focus. And that, they're certainly pressuring for criminal charges, which is an absolutely prohibited purpose for a congressional committee, as the United States Supreme Court has said. They're only supposed to be acting on a legislative purpose. That clearly is not their agenda in holding these public primetime hearings and in the composition of the committee. That, to me, by the way, is probably what makes the committee the biggest sham of all. The people are not seeing now a real trial or real hearings. They're seeing one side. It'd be like watching a trial and only seeing the prosecution put on their case. These are all, it's made up 100% of Trump haters. And their number one goal is to make sure that they stop President Trump from running again. So every American ought to have an interest in what happened in the events on January 6th. But this is not the committee designed to find that. It's never designed to be an investigative committee. Think about this. The chairman of the committee, Thompson, filed a lawsuit against President Trump prior to becoming chairman, in which he specifically alleged that the events of January 6th were President Trump's fault and that he, Thompson, was personally injured by it. This is a guy who's supposed to be heading up the committee to investigate what happened. That's impossible now. He's made a prejudgment. You have Raskin and Schiff, who are hawking books that they wrote about the events of January 6th, again with the same conclusion. And, they have an interest, personal interest in making sure this committee comes to the conclusion that's consistent with their books. So this is not something, the American people deserve much better than this.
So what's going on? Because have we changed? Because you and I discussed off the air, because it seems that in order to be a good American, you have to be a partisan American. Now, you are a civil rights attorney. You've been talking tonight in your capacity of being a criminal defense attorney, but you're a prominent civil rights attorney. Now, I may not agree with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, but one thing that I admired about them, they took on unpopular causes. If I remember correctly, I believe there may have been a representative of Meir Kahane, the Jewish Defense League. They certainly didn't agree with his viewpoints, but that was their raison d'etre. They took on unpopular causes because that was the right thing to do, to challenge those that were taking away our civil rights, our basic American rights. Today, they have stated clearly they will only represent you if they like you. They like your viewpoint. What happened to us?
Yeah, well, no, that organization is ruined now. In fact, you see some of their former leaders speaking out against their policy now. The beauty of the ACLU had been that they would take on exactly what you say, unpopular causes to stand up for our civil rights. I'll tell you a cute story, interesting story, whatever. Some people might criticize fairly, I think. Many years ago, they convinced me to represent the leader of the Mississippi Ku Klux Klan in a case challenging on First Amendment grounds prohibition that a town in Alabama had put up against them marching and against them wearing their masks. I agreed to represent them and I won the case. But before I took on the case, I had some friends who do intelligence work on the Ku Klux Klan. So I asked them for the book on this leader, and they told me the guy was actually Jewish. He had abandoned Judaism and became Christian Science. So I got the guy on the phone before the case, and I said, I'm going to put in 100 hours pro bono. So I didn't want to hear, I don't want a Jew lawyer. So I got the guy on the phone and I said, I want you to understand that I'm Jewish. So he said, oh my God, well, it's, I wish you were white and Christian, but it's better than being a Zionist Jew at least. I said, okay, let me give you the rest of the bad news then. Today I said, I'm the chairman of the Zionist Organization of America. actually. But anyway, I've always been a Zionist, so I don't think he liked that much. But anyway, that was the ACLU. And
but did he accept you? Did he still accept you as a lawyer? Did he still take you on? Did he still want you as his lawyer?
Yeah, so he hired me as his lawyer. And then, so we won the case. He wasn't going to march in the town after all. I said, how can you possibly do that? I just spent 100 hours on your case. You're not going to march now? He said, no, after the way they treated me, I have no interest in marching there. The guy was a nut. I mean,
wow. Did you have any qualms taking on the case? Because the Ku Klux Klan is not just anti-Black, they're terribly anti-Semitic. Did you say to myself, like, should I take this case because I'm an Orthodox Jew who committed Zionist, and this guy is opposed to everything that I believe in? Maybe let another lawyer do it.
Absolutely. I thought about it, but they didn't have another lawyer available, according to the ACLU, whatever. And they had hired me because I had represented the ACLU's interests in Alabama in some child cases, different things that came up. But I certainly had some qualms about it, and particularly in the courtroom, there were people who had been victimized by the Klan, and they were very upset about it. So I tried to settle the case before we ever had to litigate it. And I said, just let them march and nobody pay attention to them and be done with it. But they said they couldn't do it politically. So I had qualms about it. But at the end of the day, I felt I was representing the Constitution.
Because I know in Skokie, some Jewish lawyers got flack. And if I remember correctly, I'm trying to think if Alan Dershowitz may have represented one of them.
Jack Greenberg was kind of the principal lawyer. He was a Jewish guy who was in the Skokie case, Jewish guy involved with the ACLU. But I mean, I believe Alan Dershowitz would have supported me in this case, but we're also very good friends. So
yeah, no, he's a regular. In fact, we carry his program on the air right now. But the fact is, though, that it's an amazing thing that the ACLU has changed so dramatically. And by the way, the KKK and American Nazis, again, a lot of them wanted Jewish lawyers. They hated Jews, but they wanted to be represented. They wanted the best. And if you want the best, who are the best lawyers? Jewish lawyers. They're not suicidal, or some of them. Some of them realize that if they want to get off, they need to get a Jewish lawyer.
Yeah. So it goes.
So I want to get back to politics because we spoke about the President Donald Trump, but I know you were in the news this week with Steve Bannon. So tell us about that.
Well, this Bannon case is very unfortunate. It's unprecedented. I'll put it like this in a nutshell. Steve Bannon was given a subpoena to testify before this January 6th committee, which he and many other people consider to be a complete sham committee. I consider them to be a sham committee. And he had a lawyer representing him named Bob Costello, very experienced criminal defense lawyer, and other lawyers. He was a former prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, and so on. When Bannon got the subpoena, his lawyer, Bob Costello, got a phone call from President Trump lawyer Justin Clark saying that the president was aware of the subpoena and that he was invoking executive privilege, that Bannon was not to comply with the production of documents or testifying before the committee. That's what his lawyer told him, and his lawyer told him that his hands are tied. He can't do anything. He cannot comply. He cannot appear. And Bannon relied on that advice. Back by way of background, the United States Department of Justice, which is prosecuting the case, has this Office of Legal Counsel. They give binding, authoritative opinions for the Justice Department. They're binding on the Justice Department. Going back to 1956, the absolute firm, consistent policy of the Justice Department has been that if a person gets a subpoena from a congressional committee and executive privilege is invoked, that person is immune, need not appear, must not appear, and that the criminal contempt statute cannot be applied against them. The opinions go on to say this applies equally to former employees of the executive branch. And of course, Bannon was a close advisor to President Trump, employed by the executive branch. Finally, the opinions go further and say executive privilege can be invoked as to a private citizen, which makes sense. If, let's say, totally crazy hypothetical, President Biden decided the economy is not great today, and he wanted to call in the CEO of Exxon to ask for some advice, and they wanted that discussion to be privileged, he could do that. He could call it an executive privilege discussion, and that person couldn't be subpoenaed to testify before Congress based on the Justice Department policy. Well, this judge this week said that he admits that he agrees that those opinions all say that and that they're binding, but that since Bannon was no longer employed and the conversation took place after Bannon had been employed, he's not so sure that they apply. Well, first, that's not the test. The test is what Bannon reasonably believed. His lawyer told him these opinions all apply. He must not comply with the subpoena. it's reasonable for a person to rely on your lawyer's advice. Now, last thing I want to say is there's an old case, 1960 case from the DC Circuit that says when a person's charged with contempt of Congress, you can't use advice of counsel as a defense. This judge has admitted that he believes that law is wrong. It's out of date. The law has developed considerably since then on what willfully means, but he feels his hands are bound. Well, they're not bound on the defense of entrapment by estoppel, which simply says if the government puts out certain information like these opinions and the defendant reasonably relies on them to believe he's acting in compliance with the law, then he can't be found guilty of a crime. So now the judge is weighing whether he's going to let that evidence come in or not. They're basically tying Bannon's hands, but the prosecution never should have been brought in the first place. It's outrageous.
So what's going on? Because it's not the only case where cases shouldn't be brought, and there was one official brought up in shackles also for not testifying. What's happening to us? Our civil rights are being trampled upon, and really nobody's doing anything about it.
We have never seen
out the window.
Right. We have never seen this kind of partisan political weaponization of the criminal justice system. Some people suggested it is similar to what we saw during the Watergate period in the sense that we have Congress, the executive branch, and the DOJ all working together. And so for political reasons here, look, this Merrick Garland has turned out to be a terrific disappointment. He issued a press release in the Bannon case saying this case represents the equal application of the law. It's anything but that. You have U.S. attorneys and Department of Justice officials in every administration, from the far left to the far right, saying we don't prosecute criminally former or current members of the executive branch when executive privilege has been invoked. They're scared to death of Bannon. Bannon has a huge following on his podcast, and they want to stop him, and they want to send a message and intimidate. Because, listen, if they wanted his testimony, the obvious answer is, and Bannon offered this, take him to a civil judge and have the judge weigh the privilege claim. Bannon said, if you go before a judge and a judge says the privilege isn't valid or that I need to testify, I'll testify. They didn't do that. That's what the DOJ advises them to do. They didn't do it. They brought criminal charges, ensuring, by the way, that they'll never get his testimony. The Department of Justice opinions also recognize that. If you go the criminal route, you don't get the testimony.
Now, will they prevail, or you have to have resources in order to defend yourself? But is it possible to go into court and get an injunction based on executive privilege that they shouldn't be able to proceed? In other words, how is one protected when the law is executive privilege exists? How do you protect yourself when you have a weaponized, and a change where they're flouting the law, basically speaking?
Right. Well, we can't get an injunction because of the criminal case. So the only choice he's going to have here is to go to trial. And if, God forbid, he loses, then all of these issues are preserved for appeal. And, frankly, it's a pretty good sign when the judge already has said he thinks the law is wrong, but that his hands are tied by it, at least on the advice of counsel issue.
But in other words, doesn't the judge know the law? What's the judge waiting for? He wants to test the waters to see what the reaction is going to be. What's he checking out? Either it's the law or not the law.
Right. What he says is he believes the 1960 case is still on the books. However, he recognizes our argument that since 1995, at least, the law has changed dramatically on what willfully means. But he says he's just a lower court judge. He has to follow the outstanding case, and the issues never come up before. Of course, the issues never come up because people don't get prosecuted for this. So it's going to come up squarely in this case. Alan Dershowitz and others have said that there's no possible way this conviction can stand if he gets convicted, but it may have to go all the way up to the Supreme Court.
But in his case, he obviously has the funds to hire a lawyer and go the whole route. Lots of people that may be in similar situations don't have the resources. So how are they protected?
Yeah, they're not protected. And it's costing Bannon hundreds of thousands of dollars. He's committed to the fight. But take a guy like Peter Navarro. He's the only other person charged like this now. And they saw that he was going pro se. He says he doesn't want to spend his retirement savings, on some sham like this. I see now he has hired a couple of lawyers, so we'll see what happens. I assume they're going to piggyback off of our arguments and also take this issue up. But, it's also absurd. They're rushing Bannon's case to trial. You have all of these hundreds of January 6th defendants waiting in jail for a trial, and Bannon's case is a misdemeanor. They have 3 federal prosecutors assigned to it and 4 FBI agents. It's an absolute bad joke.
So how do they get away? I know. Forgive me for harping. How do they get away with this? Because this is a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, politics. You have the same party running the executive branch, which includes the DOJ and Congress now. So, unless that changes, they're going to continue to get away with it. And unfortunately, the media doesn't cover it properly. The media hasn't done one story yet on the government trying to block all of Bannon's defenses to get a fair trial. So the way the government would have it, and right now the way the judge seems to be headed is Bannon's not going to be able to tell any story at trial. His defense is, I got a subpoena. I'm a lay person. I got a subpoena. I hired a lawyer. My lawyer told me, here's what the law is. The president of the United States invoked executive privilege. I'm not permitted to testify. I offered to testify if they get a judge to order me to testify. And now I'm facing criminal charges for following my lawyer's advice and what I understood the law to be. It hasn't happened before.
Now, let me ask you a question. Should Steve Bannon prevail under the law, is he allowed to sue for his legal fees?
It's going to be very difficult. Almost every player in the system is going to have immunity. That's one of the travesties of this system. If a person's wrongfully charged, it can cost them an arm and a leg. Right now, they're not giving him any defenses. So, it's going to be kind of tough. He may just sit there for his trial.
How do we change things? Because this is not the way I'm not looking at right or left. I'm just looking, the law has to be fair and equally applied to everyone. I'm a big believer in that. How do we change the system to be a more equitable one and a more just one?
I don't know. It's a much bigger picture than just this case, unfortunately. We, right now, I would say, quite frankly, we've got to act at the ballot box. But because, we're seeing a terrible abuse of government going on. But in the long run, you're right. There have to be certain neutral principles that transcend politics. And one is adherence to the rule of law. So in this case, we're going to have to get a Court of Appeals of the United States Supreme Court to step in eventually and say, this is complete nonsense and stuff. In the case they're talking about from 1960, executive privilege wasn't involved. Obviously, that makes a difference on whether you should be able to rely on the advice of counsel. We know from the United States Supreme Court that executive privilege has to be permitted as defense in a contempt of Congress case. All constitutional defenses have to be open to the defendant. And that's being cut off in the case of Steve Bannon. I asked the judge the other day to pretend for a second that the defendant's name wasn't Stephen Bannon.
And what did he say?
He didn't answer that directly, but I said, think about how this affects other people. Think about this scenario. This is exactly how the judge's order would play out based on what he said so far. Let's say the National Security Advisor meets with the president on Monday. They discuss very sensitive subjects. And the National Security Advisor at the end of the day says, by the way, Mr. President, I'm leaving the executive branch. I'm going to join Raytheon, a private company now, as of tomorrow. So Tuesday, he's with Raytheon. And the president calls him up and says, by the way, Joe, I want to ask you some more questions about these sensitive areas in our national defense. According to the judge's order, the conversation they had Monday couldn't be the subject of a contempt charge if he didn't, testify about it. But the conversation Tuesday, even though the president said was privileged, Congress could compel on penalty of criminal contempt if he didn't tell what happened in that conversation. That's an absurd result. That doesn't make sense on any level. And the rationale on protecting you against the contempt of Congress charge based on the Department of Justice opinions is executive privilege, separation of powers, the sanctity of that process, wanting people to willingly come forth and speak, knowing that their conversations will be privileged. It's got nothing to do with who the witness is.
We're sitting with David Schoen. He is an Orthodox. He's a civil liberties lawyer. He's also a federal criminal defense lawyer, and he has such prominent clients as ex-President Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, and now Steve Bannon and others. When we come back, we continue our conversation. We'll also take some of your phone calls at 212-769-1925, 212-769-1925. You want to email us, zevbrenner@gmail.com, zevbrenner@gmail.com. And we're back. David Schoen, he's a very prominent civil rights attorney, criminal defense attorney. He represents a whole slew of such prominent individuals as ex-President Donald Trump, now Steve Bannon, Jeffrey Epstein, just to name some of them. And let's go to Tim in Kew Garden Hills. Tim, are you there?
Yeah, hi. Yes, so good evening, both of you. Let me just preface what I'm going to say by saying I used to be a Trump supporter. I wore the red whole 9 yards. On January 6th, I broke free of my trance, if you will, And I'm also a lawyer like your guest. So I am very, very sympathetic to the idea that everyone deserves their day in court. Their Sixth Amendment rights, the Sixth Amendment rights under the Constitution have to be protected. All of that, 100%. But at the end of the day, I'm also worried about not having a country anymore. You have Minuvalim, these lowlights like Mr. Trump and the rest of them that are trying to undermine the rule of law in this country. And I am frankly scared that so many people, you're more worried about executive privilege and look, you're a lawyer. If you're a lawyer, fine, that's your job to represent your client zealously. But for everybody else, let me just say, I'm more worried about people like Donald Trump and his henchmen who have no respect for the Constitution. All they want is raw power. And it also shocks me that so many Orthodox Jews are, no one tells you as a lawyer what client you have to take, right? If I have a client that comes to me and says they raped a child, I can say, you know what? You're a lowlife. I'm not taking your case, right? So it sort of upsets me and saddens me that Orthodox Jews are so quick to defend this Ninuvel, this lowlife who tried to destroy democracy. I'm sorry if I'm a little upset, but as I said, I used to be a Trump supporter. I broke free of the cult, and I hope there's at least one or two people listening on the program tonight that are going to hear my words and, just like Judge Ludig said the other day, are going to recognize the clear and present danger that this man
I'm going to let David respond
poses.
to you,
Thank
Tim.
you so much.
What kind of lawyer are you? Are you a criminal defense? Are you?
I've done criminal defense. I've done civil litigation. Currently, I'm more on the teaching side of things.
Before I let him, David, respond, are you concerned, though, that our rights, forget right or left, but if civil rights are being trampled upon, and here in this case it's by the committee and by the government, shouldn't we be concerned? Whatever you're feeling about Donald Trump, but we're seeing an erosion of civil rights. I mean, that's what bothers me is that, and I spoke to Alan Dershowitz about this many times, and he agrees with me, that we're seeing a dangerous situation.
It absolutely does bother me, and it should bother us. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm much more worried about the clear and present danger to the rule of law itself. And
how
to
can
the Constitution.
Forgive me, how can there be a present danger to rule of law when Donald Trump is not in office right now?
He needs to be prosecuted. I mean, he's on tape in the state of Georgia. He's literally DASCA on tape trying to tamper with an election. I mean, I fully expect that he's going to get indicted in Georgia, and he needs to be prosecuted in a court of law for that. 100%.
David Schoen, I'll let you respond.
Yeah, I think he absolutely should not be prosecuted criminally. I don't think any crime was committed, but I think there's a chance he could be indicted. It's a very political prosecutor in Fulton County who has an agenda, the anti-Trump agenda and constituency. But about the bigger issue that was raised, Tim's absolutely right. A lawyer does get to choose the client, and many people would have chosen otherwise. I feel very strongly, one might say it's a rationalization. I don't think so. I feel very strongly that I'm defending the Constitution in each of these cases. I should point out, I suppose, I also have represented for many years and continue to represent the Democratic Party of the United States. Just got them dismissed from a lawsuit that was brought against them. I represent the Libertarian Party. I represented a socialist candidate for president in the last election. So I don't get involved with politics, but I do get involved with issues. And if I feel, for example, the socialist candidate was an issue of ballot access, I want everybody to have a chance to participate in the process. I don't happen to agree that President Trump, presented or presents a clear and present danger to democracy. But he's right. Judge Ludig said that. I've probably never agreed with anything Judge Ludig has said. I thought he was a horrible judge when he was a judge, but he's entitled to his opinion. He's respected by many people. But anyway, I don't get into the politics of the issue. I think the issues here are very important. And I think that the perversion of the criminal law for political purposes is a great risk to all of us. And that's my little role in this process right now.
Let's go to Stanley in Forest Hills. Go ahead, Stan.
It's somewhat pathetic that this guy is on tonight. But
why pathetic? Why be insulted?
Because
why do you say that?
The one thing the man believes in, this counselor, he believes in justice. He believes in the Constitution. He believes in the Bill of Rights. I hear that. But the man he defends doesn't. What is it that you don't get, sir? He finds the Bill of Rights and the Constitution abhorrent. Abhorrent. He uses it more as toilet paper than to use for the rights of people. He has no use for it. If you can't see that, I pity you. But you're only about defending people's rights, and that's nothing wrong with it. You can look. If Hitler was alive, I suspect you'd defend him, and that's okay. You could have done that.
Hold on, Nate.
No.
Carrying it to an extreme. You're going extreme.
No, I'm not going extreme. The worst person deserves legal. The worst person in the world deserves legal representation. Even had Hitler survived and he went on trial, he would have got representation from somebody. But the point I'm trying to make is that this gentleman has not deserved. The man he defends has absolutely no respect and has shown that. The committee meetings show him for what he is. He tried in one area in the state of Georgia, you're from the South, to, pressure the attorney general, the gentleman from the state, to, find votes and pressure him to do this and that. And the man was not, who's a Republican. He has been and should be prosecuted. I'm not making that up. The evidence is there. You may not see it. You may find this a show trial. And Zeb's comment that this is not, we're in it's not the right type of situation here. I don't see justice being, it's not fair. It's exactly fair. I mean, he's not, he wants to come on and make a speech. Okay, I got no problem with him. Let him make a speech. He wants to do 3 hours. Fine. Let them ask him questions, the committee. Then come on and make a speech. But the point I'm trying to say is I find a counselor is out of touch with reality. Yes, he knows the law. He knows but the man who he represents, or maybe he'll take him on, does not. And I would suspect you'd have more respect.
Hold on, I'm going to let Dave respond.
Sure,
but
go ahead.
Ask you a question. If let's say, let's put Donald Trump on ice for just a moment.
Okay.
Let's say somebody who David Schoen or any criminal lawyer is defending doesn't believe in the Constitutional Bill of Rights.
Okay.
Would that mean that he's not entitled to protection under the law?
Did you just hear me? I said everyone is entitled to it.
But you seem
I'll mention his name again. Adolf Hitler would be under the same thing in a court of law if that was Nuremberg. There would be someone to defend him.
I'm going to let David Schoen respond to you because he deals with.
But would you defend him? No, I don't think he would. Neither would I, by the way.
All right, go ahead, David.
Sure, go ahead.
Couple of things. I'm interested. I know you consider this to be still out of touch with reality, but I'm interested in the process. My complaint about the January 6th committee and these hearings is similar to my complaint about the Mueller Commission. I say the American people deserve to know what actually happened on January 6th. It was an important event in American history. If you take a committee that's only composed of Trump haters, which the Mueller Commission was, and this committee is, then we have absolutely no reason to give any credibility to anything they do. So, for example, we saw in the impeachment trial, when the Democratic House managers put on their case, we found that they had manipulated the evidence. They changed words around that people had said. In that case, though, we were able to put up, the other side of the case, at least. In these hearings you're literally seeing a prosecution, partisan politicians, only putting on one side of a case, hired a production company to do it, and editing out whatever they want to edit out. Listen, on the phone call with Georgia, what Trump would tell you is that, and people who know him very well would say he believes this inside and out. He understood from people who advised him that votes were literally, boxes were taken from under tables and stolen. Now, listen, if he lost the election, he's upset about that, and he may be open to hearing one point of view and all that. But he had people coming to him, including this law professor and other eyewitnesses. I have people writing emails to me, calling me. I was there that night. I saw them steal votes out of a box.
Yeah.
All of that kind of, okay.
Finished. Go ahead.
Listen, I don't know. I didn't do the investigation. So far, people have said they have not found evidence of fraud and so on. I'm telling you, Trump believes this inside and out. You say, he tramples on the rule of law, doesn't believe in the Bill of Rights. He wouldn't tell you that. He would say he believes in the Bill of Rights and enforcing them, all the way to the hilt, and so do the people around him. But my point here is it's the process. I won't stand for a process, if I can fight against it, a process that's, in my view, a sham. You want to hear an independent committee on the January 6th thing? That's fine. Why would Pelosi deny Banks and Jordan a spot on the committee? Well, now they claim because...
I'll tell you why. Counselor, I'll tell you why, Counselor. Mr. Jordan was part of the conspiracy. He talked about the possibility. They have him on tape talking about the possibility of the election overthrow. They have him. They're talking. The other thing is John Eastman. What about John Eastman?
Okay, let David respond to you. Go ahead.
You say election.
You have it. They have just as much and more. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let's be civil. David.
I'm civil. Go ahead.
You say, election overthrow. These folks believe that there were legitimate problems with election.
Hold on. You're interrupting again.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
These folks genuinely believe that there was a problem with election integrity. And listen, many of the rules around the country were changed based on COVID and other reasons. Those are some of the battles I fought for people who were ripped off of getting on the ballot in the first place. So there are legitimate claims about election integrity. Your point is, and many people's point is, there's no evidence of fraud. That's one thing. I'm talking about the process. Many people would say Jordan and Banks were kept off because they wanted a full investigation. They wanted to investigate the warnings that Pelosi got and so on, and the committee didn't want that. So I can't trust the process. If it's all right. Trump haters, I don't trust the process.
Well, last question for you, Stan. Are you happy with the process where due process seems to be going out the window?
Absolutely. Let's get something straight here, okay? This isn't over. There was an election. There was an investigation. There was court. Of all people, you would know, Counselor, it went to court all the time, and all of the courts threw 99.99% of them out. The election was over. He lost. And once, there was an old saying, a guy interviewed him 40 years ago. This guy likes to throw stuff against the wall to see what sticks. So he uses this, and this is stick plenty. You say it long enough, people believe it. So there has been the election was held, he lost, and that's the end of it. Get over it.
Anyway, I thank you for your phone call, and we're going to take a short commercial break. David Schoen here just for a little while longer. We have coming up Congressman Tom Suozzi. So we're going to take a short break. As you heard, he's a criminal defense lawyer. He's a very prominent civil rights attorney, and he represents whether it's Steve Bannon, Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump, and others. Our final stretch right after these messages. We're back, our final stretch with criminal defense attorney David Schoen. He's also a civil rights attorney, and we're taking as many calls as you can, so please try to be brief and to the point. Let's go first to Arya in Flatbush. Arya in Flatbush, your question for our guest.
Okay, I have a comment, then a question. First, I want to say that the last caller, he represents a part of America that is, if people like him didn't exist, and people like Adam Schiff wouldn't exist, Nancy Pelosi wouldn't exist.
Listen, there are Democrats, and there you have Democrat Republicans, and we're open to all expressions on the air.
Okay, the problem is they don't understand the constitutional aspects of what's going on. This is a crisis of one branch of government collapsing. That's the court system. This happened before Trump ran for office. Let me ask you, why do you think that all the cases of Obama's birth certificate, no court claimed jurisdiction? It's the same reason why they didn't claim jurisdiction over the election. Too big of an issue, not a case of first impression, and they were all scared, so they punted the football. It's a constitutional crisis because of the collapse of the Supreme Court. Now, where do people legitimately go? It's not an insurrection. They legitimately march on the Capitol because they want to lay it in the hands of Congress. Congress has to override.
Again, we have a lot of calls.
I have a question. Okay, I have a question.
Question to our guest.
My question is this. I'm under the impression, a commentator, Debbie Schlussel, very aptly said it a year ago, that he was investigated already. It's called the impeachment investigation. I'm under the impression that an impeachment, high crimes, misdemeanors, that implies criminal behavior. Is this not double jeopardy? How could he be indicted if he was not impeached? This would constitute double jeopardy, number one. And number two, I was under the impression you cannot indict a president of the United States for things he did while he was president.
Yeah, what you say is perfectly logical. Unfortunately, there is authority for the idea that he could be subject to a civil case or criminal prosecution. I don't think anything like that would be appropriate in this case. It was fully heard. They had every opportunity in the impeachment trial. And as I say, they manipulated evidence there. If you take the president's speech in context, he emphasized peacefully and so on. they don't want to report it and they don't want to hear it, but there was no crime committed here, period. You asked the right question with the double jeopardy. Unfortunately, there is authority on the other side of things, but, we'll see what I argue if, God forbid, it happens and he gets indicted.
If he gets indicted, has you been in touch with President Donald Trump as far as maybe having represent you again?
I don't go into any, as you know, I don't go into any conversation with him, but I'll put it this way. If he,
are you invoking executive privilege?
If God forbid he were to get indicted again, I would be representing him.
And anyway, thank you for your phone call, Aryeh.
Okay.
Let's go to Yaakov in Mubin. Thank you for waiting. Your question. Go ahead, Yaakov.
Yeah. I hope I get phrased this right. I might be better off speaking to the next person. With all the crimes and everything else going on in the country, I'm wondering if the federal government can have some kind of minimum sentencing on things with gun crimes and other that, because it seems like the states have all different laws, and some states are very lenient, and some are very strict, and the government already has, like, the FBI working on gun crimes and all that happens throughout many states. Why can't Congress have some minimum sentencing where when someone does a crime with a gun or something, that there's a minimum sentence and they're not just sprung out of after a couple months?
You want to see minimum sentencing for gun possession? Is that what you're talking about?
That's one example. I have another idea, but I'm working on it.
So let me just have, even though it's not beyond the purview of our conversation, I'll let David respond to it. The question is just going to be, and I'm going to broaden the question, is to the fact is that these minimum sentences for crimes, that's something which we should be engaging in, should it be left to the discretion of judges as opposed to minimum guideline. I think Rubashkin got himself, according to the law, was 27 years based on the books, and it was an unfair judgment. And we see lots of cases like that. I'll let David Rishon respond.
Yeah, with all due respect, I don't personally agree with the mandatory minimums. I do think each case has to be looked at on its face, and the judge ought to decide. In the Bannon case, for example, if he gets convicted, God forbid, there's a mandatory minimum sentence of a month on each count in jail. It's not a crime. It's not a crime in the first place. If it were, it's not something that deserves jail. But I will tell you this. There is in the federal system, if someone commits a crime under the jurisdiction of the federal courts, there is a mandatory minimum for if a gun is involved with the crime. There's a couple cases. It's a little bit of a complicated question whether the crime was used in connection with a crime of violence and so on. But they already have those kinds of things. But in terms of, the states coming up with different laws, that's the way our system works. I mean, it is a system, generally, a federal system, a system in which the states are entitled in most areas to make their own law. There's some federal standards also that apply, but all in all, there's a balance that has to be drawn.
Anyway, thank you for your phone call. Let's go on to Gila in Flatbush. Go ahead, Gila in Midwood.
Thank you so much for making this show a marketplace for all ideas. As Rabbi Spivak, Ohev L'Shalom, used to say, I want to take an opposite view to stand from Forest Hills.
Just lower your rating.
For years and years, President Trump has been blackened to the point where everything is blamed on him. He's been out of office for 2 years. This bargain that we have as president, who has a 23% approval rating among Hispanics, all of the things, foundations collapsing, families cannot pay bills because of the
your
inflation.
Point that you want David Schoen to address is
the fact that why the country has resorted, not the country, but why we are held hostage by the progressive left. We're held hostage, and the Republicans are not doing anything about it. I mean, like you said, what is going on? We feel like we're being held hostage. Everything is being rammed down our throats. Now, tomorrow, there's a parade on Fifth Avenue where we stay clear of it because we're facing this. Never did we face this for 4 years ago, we didn't face all of these crises going on. And we know that God brings this under Biden. He didn't bring this under President Trump, where world leaders respected him.
Yeah,
He
I'm
didn't
gonna let
fall
David
asleep and
respond
read
to
a
it.
book.
We're in the brevity of time. We'll let David respond to you. Go ahead, David.
Yeah,
Okay.
These are broad questions that, I mean, I don't know anybody has an answer to, but I will say this. It is very puzzling to me why the administration feels they need to pander to the so-called, I don't call them progressive, they're regressive. People like AOC, Tlaib, that crowd, what I call the hate squad, Omar. So, and I want you to know, by the way, that I believe that the rhetoric from that crowd is largely responsible for the anti-Semitic violence around the country for the past year. In fact, I just filed a lawsuit.
1,000%.
I just filed a lawsuit on behalf of a young man from Long Island who was beaten up by a group of Arabs in Times Square a year ago, alleging, first of all,
counsel, what about city universities where the anti-Semitism, Jewish students are being harassed and tortured, and nothing is being done about it because the Arabs are paying for the chairships?
Well, the ZOA, our Center for Law and Justice, by the way, is challenging some of the actions on university campuses now. But in this case, what I have alleged in the federal complaint I filed for Joseph Borgen in the beating case is that that kind of violence is a direct result from the rhetoric from AOC, Tlaib, Omar, and the others. Simon Wiesenthal Center supports that idea. They're not really a political group. So there's a lot of data out there showing a direct relationship. And I don't know why this administration can't distance themselves from that. They seem to believe politically they need that crowd, and they're selling out principles by following their lead.
Well, what about, I just want to say something, that if Biden accomplished what President Trump accomplished under his administration, the trumpets would be blaring from one side of the world to the other. But because they hated his personality, and I believe, too, they hated his children, his grandchildren, they went after him, they hate Orthodox Jews. We are held hostage by this country now, and it's getting worse and worse. And the answer is Mashiach has to come, and we've got to go to Israel.
Okay, thank you for your phone call. Any response, David?
No, she's voicing the view that many people feel. I love to hear the passion from your listeners, frankly.
You got it.
Let's go to Henya in Crown Heights. Your question for our guest.
Hi. Actually, it's a little bit of a statement. I want to tell you I have 8 children who live out of New York. My daughter is married over 30 years. My baby's married over 10 years. I receive ballots for them every time there is voting. I have written to them and asked them to delete them from the list. I keep getting them over and over again. If I wasn't honest, I can vote because they don't ask you for any ID. My friend down the block, her husband passed away 20 years ago, 20, and she still gets ballots for him. Of course it was rigged. Not a question about it. And I want to tell you the last thing. I went voting with my husband, and they brought in 2 busloads of very, very mentally deranged people from Kings County Hospital. And of course, you should see how they were standing. I mean, they really weren't. I mean, sadly enough. And they had somebody walking with them in the booth. Wow. What do you think? Of course they vote. I mean, I've seen this, and I'm saying stuff.
Henry, we got your point. We're almost out of time, so we'll let David respond to you.
I would share that, so. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Very, very troubling, without any question. But, again, this is an American who cares about the integrity of the process and stuff. She's reporting what she knows and sees and hears, and very important to have that information.
All right. Thank you for your phone call. And let's go. Okay. What we're going to do is take one last call. Here's just a question for you before we get to our final caller, is that did January 6th change at all? Because the question is, did the president handle it properly? And that's really a separate issue, but that's really what's going on in the background. Some people that supported Donald Trump changed their opinion after January 6th. Does that changes things as far as perception? And does that change things in this country? Because it seems like it could be a pivotal moment in how we're dealing with situations.
Well, I think that what the committee is counting on is that by making a production on television with using a production company, they believe that people like entertainment and they believe what they see and hear on TV. So I think that they think they're going to change a lot of hearts and minds who may have been Trump supporters before by showing them what they want to show them about these events and painting the picture they want to show. Remembering, of course, there's no ranking member on the committee to challenge anything they're saying or to guide the testimony, etc. And no one's hearing from the other side at all or challenging the credibility of witnesses who may have motivations to say what they're saying.
Okay, let's go to Avram and Kenson. I believe you're going to be the final word. Go ahead, Avram.
Yes, I'm calling to criticize Stan. I'm not saying he shouldn't be on the air. He makes for interesting radio. But one should verify any claim of fact that he presents. I don't think he has malice. I think he may have a memory problem. He was asked on the air, he said he was a Vietnam veteran, and he was asked, what weapon were you trained on? And he says, well,
I don't want to go into listen. I don't want to get into referendum, Stan. You know, we on this program we have so many different points of view, and you can express it. You can be a Democrat, liberal, conservative, Republican. We appreciate all, and he wasn't the only liberal voice that was on the air tonight, and there's nothing wrong with that.
I don't object to liberalism. I object to falsification of facts.
Listen, we live in a society where everybody's playing fast and loose with the facts. Unfortunately, nobody cares about it. The media does, and very few cover it.
Okay, so I'm just saying that the listeners should kabdehu b'chashtehu.
Anyway, I appreciate your phone call. We're almost out of time. Last question, David. Has the Democrats, because you represented Donald Trump and Steve Bannon, a lot of Republicans and considered on the right, has that affected all your work? You mentioned you're doing stuff for the Democratic groups. Has that affected at all your representation of those groups?
I don't know. I don't know that they put it together, frankly. I just got them dismissed from a lawsuit. I had represented the Democratic Party at trial many years ago, and so then this case came back. Yeah, I don't think it's affected me in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, I got canceled from teaching a law school course. I got thrown out of civil rights groups and all that, even though I've been a civil rights lawyer for 38 years, representing the left.
Are they still you anymore?
No, not at all. I would be probably the last person now that they would hire. Did they
throw you out because of the Trump representation?
Yeah, they told me at the law school that it would make students and faculty uncomfortable to have me teaching there because I represented them. I said to them, listen, right now, at the request of a civil rights group, I'm representing a person in a capital murder case who killed a woman and her 2 children. That, they tell me, is God's work. You know, you're fighting against the death penalty. But if you represented Donald Trump, President of the United States asked you to represent him, that's it makes me ineligible now to teach, to be in civil rights groups and all that. That's pretty crazy after 38 years of fighting for civil rights.
So how does it make you feel? And do you have any recourse?
No recourse. I'm disappointed. That's, been the case. I'm still doing my civil rights cases day in and day out. Just filed a case against jail conditions in a jail in Alabama that are abhorrent. And I represent the little guy generally. It happens to be that I represented, Roger Stone, and then that led to the President Trump thing. That led to the Bannon. I'm flattered to death that, they appreciate my work and, decided they wanted to hire me, just like I am with every other client that makes that decision.
Dave, we always enjoy having you, so I want to thank you for being with us. David Schoen is a prominent civil rights attorney, criminal defense attorney, a lot of very interesting cases. You only touched on some of them, the more prominent ones, such as Donald Trump, Steve Bannon. We mentioned Jeffrey Epstein. You mentioned Roger Stone and others. But we appreciate you being here with us. Look forward to having you back again. Then we certainly got to keep these voices out there, because I am concerned when I see our civil rights being trampled. I may not have liked everything the ACLU stand for, but I like the fact that it represented everybody. And if they threw you out and only represent one point of view, I think it's bad for all of us.
You do a terrific job. Thank you so much for having me. It's a terrific show.
Thank you, David. So you're going to have me back again.
Take care.
David Schoen here on the Talkline Network, dealing with some very, very important issues for all of us. Okay, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation.